The sharp aroma of cardamom-spiced tea and freshly baked injera was my shield. It was what I created each morning at 4 a.m. when I unlocked the doors to the daily rise, my impossibly expensive dream made real. Outside, the city was a maze of steel and concrete, indifferent and cruel, but inside these walls I was an alchemist. I ground spices, kneaded dough until it sang, and transformed humble ingredients into memories of home. My white chef's coat, always crisp despite the kitchen heat, bore the honorable stains of turmeric and Berber, and my worn leather apron felt like a second skin. This particular day started like any other. Rain arrived in the late afternoon, a torrential downpour that turned the streets into rivers and sent people scrambling for shelter. Weather like this was good for business, drawing customers seeking warmth and the comfort of hot food. My sole employee, David, an eager young man who still saw the world through optimistic eyes, was restacking cups behind the counter, whistling a tune that grated against my exhausted nerves. It was nearly closing time when the old woman appeared.
Thank you.
She materialized at the door so suddenly that the entrance bell barely registered her arrival. She was tiny and fragile, her designer cashmere coat drenched and clinging to her slight frame. Her face was etched with the deep lines of age, but her eyes were piercing, intelligent, holding a weight of weariness I recognized in myself after 16 hours on my feet. She stood on the entrance mat, water pooling around her expensive shoes, looking utterly lost. David moved to help, but I gestured him back. I retrieved a clean towel from the kitchen. "Please," I said gently, offering it to her. "Come inside, warm yourself. This rain shows no mercy." She accepted the towel with trembling hands and gave a small, dignified bow. No words, just a slow shuffle to the corner table where she lowered herself carefully into a chair, breathing in shallow, labored gasps. I brought her a steaming cup of spiced ginger tea and a piece of honey-soaked baklava, still warm from the oven. "No charge," I said before she could object. "No one should face weather like this without something to restore the spirit." She looked from the cup to my face, and something flickered in her expression before settling into a genuine, warm smile. For the next hour, she simply sat there, sipping tea and eating the pastry with slow, deliberate appreciation, as though it were the finest thing she had ever tasted. When she finally prepared to leave, the rain was falling even harder. I watched her struggle with 2 heavy briefcases, their leather worn but expensive. My shift had ended. Every muscle in my body ached, and my small apartment called to me, but I couldn't let her go alone. "Wait," I called out. "Where are you going? Let me help you with those." She tried to refuse, insisting she could manage, but her protests were weak. I could see the exhaustion carved into every line of her face. I removed my apron, grabbed my umbrella, and took the bags from her hands. They were surprisingly heavy, dense with what felt like documents or books. We walked 3 blocks in silence, the umbrella barely adequate against the driving rain. A sleek black Mercedes was waiting at the corner, its engine purring almost silently. A driver in an immaculate black suit emerged immediately, opening the rear door with practiced efficiency, his expression carefully neutral. The old woman turned to me, her hand gripping my forearm with unexpected strength. "Thank you, young man," she said, her voice rough but steady. "Kindness is rare. It will not be forgotten." Before I could respond, she was gone, settled into the car's plush interior as it glided away, red taillights vanishing into the rain-soaked darkness. I stood there for a moment, water seeping through my shoes, an odd feeling settling in my chest. It was just kindness for an elderly woman, I told myself. Nothing more. Before we continue, please like and subscribe. The next morning, the cafe felt different, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the weather. Sunlight streamed through the windows, but a shadow lingered from the night before. I tried to shake it off, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of grinding beans and preparing dough. David was oblivious, chattering about a game he'd watched. Around 9, Mr. Hassan from the bookshop next door came in for his usual macchiato. His weathered face, as lined and interesting as the old manuscripts he sold, was etched with concern. "Kofi," he said, leaning across the counter and lowering his voice. "You had important visitors last night. A car like that hasn't been seen on this street since the mayor came through promising improvements 5 years ago." I shrugged noncommittally. "Just an elderly woman caught in the rain, Mr. Hassan." He took a long sip of his coffee, his keen eyes studying me over the rim. In this neighborhood, there's no such thing as just an elderly woman who gets collected in a car worth more than every building on this block. Be careful about the obligations you let people create. Some debts are settled in ways you cannot afford. His words sent a chill down my spine, a premonition that coiled in my gut like a serpent. I was about to dismiss his concerns as neighborhood paranoia when the door chimed. 5 women stepped inside, and the entire atmosphere of the cafe dropped 20 degrees. They were imposing, dressed in identical black designer suits that probably cost more than my quarterly rent. They moved with synchronized precision that was deeply unsettling. They didn't glance at the menu. They didn't approach the counter. They simply positioned themselves at various points around the small room, their expressions blank and unreadable, their hands clasped professionally in front of them. A few customers hunched over their laptops suddenly found urgent reasons to leave. A couple who had been laughing near the window fell silent, paid in cash, and hurried out. David froze behind the counter, his knuckles white against the cloth he was gripping. The silence was oppressive, suffocating. Fear was a cold stone in my chest, but anger burned at its edges. This was my space, my sanctuary. I dried my hands on my apron, keeping my movements deliberately calm, and walked out from behind the counter. I faced the one nearest the door, a tall woman with sharp features and a thin scar along her jawline. "Can I help you?" My voice was steadier than I felt. "Or are you here to frighten away my customers?" She didn't blink. Her eyes looked through me as if I were invisible. "Someone is coming to speak with you," she said, her voice low and measured. "We were instructed to wait." The waiting was torture. 10 minutes stretched into eternity. Each tick of the wall clock felt like a hammer against my nerves. The 5 women remained motionless as statues, their presence sucking all warmth and life from my cafe. David had retreated to the kitchen, pretending to organize supplies, but I could see his hands shaking. I held my position in the center of the room, arms crossed, refusing to show fear. Finally, a vehicle even more imposing than last night's pulled up outside. A black Bentley, windows tinted to impenetrable darkness. One of the women moved to open the cafe door, a gesture of coordinated deference. The woman who entered was the embodiment of power itself. She was tall, perhaps 40, with sharp, elegant features that were almost severe in their perfection. Her black suit was a masterpiece of tailoring, emphasizing her commanding presence. Her dark hair was swept back in a flawless style, and her eyes, dark and cold as winter ice, swept across the room before settling on me. They held no warmth, only a chilling, analytical intensity. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to absolute authority, her footsteps silent despite her heels. The air seemed to shift around her. This was a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to dominate a space. Her mere presence demanded submission. She stopped a few feet from me, her head tilting slightly as she assessed me from head to toe. I felt exposed, examined by that clinical gaze. I lifted my chin, refusing to be intimidated. "You've frightened my customers and terrorized my employee," I said, keeping my voice level. "You have 60 seconds to explain this before I call the police." The ghost of a smile touched her lips, cold and humorless, never reaching her eyes. "The police," she repeated, as if the concept were quaintly amusing. "I assure you they have no interest in our conversation." She gestured dismissively to her security team. "My name is Seo-yeon. I'm here regarding your interaction yesterday with an elderly woman." The name meant nothing to me, but her tone was not one of gratitude. It was possessive, almost accusatory, as if my simple act of kindness had violated some unspoken protocol. An intrusion into a world where I didn't belong. "I helped someone caught in the rain," I said flatly, my temper rising. "If you've come to thank me, this is an unusual approach." "Gratitude is a simple emotion," she said, her voice smooth yet carrying an unmistakable edge. "My family's affairs are never simple. You inserted yourself, however briefly, into our business. My mother was vulnerable, and that carries consequences." She took another step closer, invading my space, and I caught the faint scent of expensive perfume mixed with something else, something dangerous and metallic, like steel. "She has requested your services," Seo-yeon said, her eyes locking onto mine. "This is not a request you will refuse." The phrase hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken implications. My mind raced through terrifying possibilities, each worse than the last. Was this some elaborate extortion? Did they think I possessed something they wanted? I stared at Seo-yeon, at her beautiful, impassive face, and saw only the calm certainty of someone who had never been denied anything in her life. The power radiating from her was an invisible, crushing force. "I run a café," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my efforts to control it. "I sell coffee and pastries. What possible services could someone like your mother want from me?" Seo-yeon's cold expression didn't waver. "My mother," she stated, her voice dropping into a more serious, almost solemn register, "is the head of our family. She is also dying. The doctors have given her 3 months, perhaps less." The bluntness shocked me into silence. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She was simply stating a fact, a piece on a chessboard. "Her health is failing," Seo-yeon continued, "and her tastes have become simple. She was profoundly moved by your spontaneous kindness, a quality she finds in short supply. She was also, as she expressed it, deeply impressed by your baklava." She paused, letting the absurdity sink in. This entire hostile takeover of my cafe, the 5 intimidating security personnel, the Bentley, was about a pastry. It felt surreal, like something from a film. "For the next 3 months," she declared, her gaze unwavering, "you will be responsible for preparing my mother's meals. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Simple, wholesome food. The kind you create here. She wants to taste normalcy, to connect with something genuine before she dies. That is her wish." It was a command disguised as an offer, a cage dressed up as a compliment. It sounded so benign, even charitable on the surface, but the implications were terrifying. It meant being bound to these people, to their dark and dangerous world. It meant my life was no longer mine. Vertigo washed over me, as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. My sense of security, painstakingly built over years of struggle, shattered like dropped china. "And if I refuse?" I whispered, the words tasting like ash. For the first time, Seo-yeon's expression shifted. The coldness in her eyes intensified, becoming something truly menacing. "My mother's wishes are my absolute priority. And you, Mr. Mensah," she paused, letting the silence stretch, "you are now one of her wishes. Refusal would be unwise. It would constitute a grave disrespect to me, to my mother, to our entire family. You do not want to disrespect my family." The threat was no longer veiled. It was a promise, delivered with the chilling calm of absolute certainty. She reached into her jacket and placed a single heavy black card on the counter. It bore a name and number, nothing else. "My driver will arrive at 7 a.m. tomorrow for the first meal. Do not be late." She turned and walked out, her security team falling into formation behind her, leaving me alone in the deafening silence of my violated sanctuary. The first rays of dawn felt intrusive, pale fingers of light probing the shadows of my sleepless night. My cafe, once a source of pride and joy, now felt like a gilded cage. I had arrived at 3 a.m., hours before my normal start, driven by nervous energy that made rest impossible. The 5 women were already there, standing across the street, their dark forms like vultures waiting for carrion. They were a permanent fixture now, a constant silent declaration that my life was no longer my own. David had called late last night, his voice trembling as he resigned. I couldn't blame him. No amount of money was worth the kind of fear that had invaded our shop, so I was alone. The familiar tasks of measuring spices and simmering broths felt alien and fraught with terrible new significance. I wasn't just cooking. I was paying tribute to a world I wanted no part of. "What do you cook for a dying matriarch?" I settled on what I knew best: comfort, honesty. A simple kitfo, the spiced raw beef prepared with the precision my grandmother had taught me, accompanied by fresh injera and a side of mild lentils. I packed it carefully into insulated containers along with the baklava that had started all of this. My hands were steady, my focus absolute. The cooking was my anchor, the one thing I could control in a world that had suddenly spiraled beyond my grasp. At precisely 7 a.m., a black town car, different from the others, pulled to the curb. A driver, as grim and silent as the security personnel, stepped out, took the containers from me without a word, and drove away. The transaction was cold, sterile, terrifying. The rest of the morning was a blur of forced normality. A few brave regulars came in, but they didn't linger, their conversations stilted as they glanced nervously at the sentries outside. By noon, the cafe was empty. I was wiping down the counter for the 100th time when the bell chimed. It was Seo-yeon. She was alone this time, and the absence of her entourage made her presence feel even more concentrated, more potent. She wore a charcoal suit today, the fabric catching the light. She stopped in the center of the room, her eyes scanning the empty tables. "It seems your business has suffered," she observed, her tone neutral. "You did this," I replied, my voice raw with resentment. "This is your doing." She ignored the accusation. "My mother enjoyed the meal," she said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a report. She said it was comforting. She took a few steps toward the counter, her gaze finally meeting mine. For a brief, unguarded moment, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't warmth, not exactly. It was more like a weary acknowledgement, a flash of shared burden. "There are rules," she said, her voice returning to its usual cold, commanding tone. "You will prepare the food, you will give it to my driver, you will have no other contact with my mother, you will not speak to her, you will not question her. Your role is to cook, nothing more. Is that clear?" I nodded numbly, my throat tight. "Why me?" I finally asked the question that had been tormenting me. "Why go to all this trouble for a stranger?" She looked away, her gaze settling on a water stain on the ceiling. "My mother is a woman of particular convictions. She believes your kindness was a sign, a moment of purity in a world that has none. She wants to hold on to that as she prepares for her end." She looked back at me, her face an unreadable mask. "And I will deny her nothing." The words were a quiet confession of fierce, absolute loyalty, a glimpse into the hidden force that drove her. She was a daughter trapped by duty, and in that moment she was almost human. The days settled into a strange, suffocating rhythm. Morning, noon, and night, I cooked. I poured all my fear, my anger, and my confusion into the food. I made rich Doro wat that simmered for hours, filling the empty café with aromatic memories of home. I baked fresh injera until my arms were sore, a physical outlet for my trapped energy. I created vibrant salads and delicate tilapia dishes, each a silent, defiant act of creation against the destruction of my peace. Every meal was a message, though I wasn't sure who it was for. Perhaps for the old woman, a reminder of a world beyond her gilded prison. Or perhaps it was for myself, a way to prove I was still a chef, a creator, not just a captive. The drivers came and went like clockwork, their faces impassive, their silence absolute. The 5 security personnel remained a permanent fixture across the street, a constant living symbol of my captivity. Seo-yeon's visits became a regular occurrence. She would appear in the late afternoons when the light was soft and the café was at its most desolate. She never said she was there to check on me, but we both knew she was. She would sit at the counter, the same spot every time, and order black coffee. She drank it slowly, her dark eyes watching my every movement as I cleaned or prepared for the next meal. Our conversations were sparse, clipped exchanges that felt more like strategic maneuvers than genuine communication. She would ask about the ingredients I was using, her questions sharp and intelligent. I would answer in monosyllables, refusing to give her any more of myself than absolutely necessary. But the silence between the words began to change. It was no longer just empty and hostile. It grew thick with unspoken things. One afternoon, as I was crushing fresh cardamom, the warm, sweet scent filling the air, she spoke without looking at me. "My father used to love that smell," she said, her voice quiet, almost lost in the cavernous silence of the café. "He had a small spice garden before he died. It was the only thing that gave him peace." I stopped what I was doing, stunned by the unexpected crack in her armor. It was the first personal detail she had ever offered, a tiny humanizing glimpse behind the iron curtain of her control. I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded and resumed my work. But the dynamic had shifted. I started watching her more closely, noticing the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way she would roll her shoulders when she thought I wasn't looking. I saw a woman carrying an impossible weight, a person shackled by a duty she seemed to both honor and resent. And in her gaze, I began to see something else, something beyond the cold assessment of a warden. I saw a flicker of grudging respect, and perhaps something more, a dangerous, unwelcome curiosity that mirrored my own. The routine shattered a month into my sentence. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was packing up dinner, a simple roasted chicken with root vegetables, when Seo-yeon walked in. She wasn't wearing one of her immaculate suits. Instead, she was in a simple black turtleneck and tailored trousers, casual attire that somehow made her look even more imposing, as if she were shedding armor. There was a new tension in her posture, a coiled energy that set my nerves on edge. "There's a change of plans," she said, her voice clipped. "You won't be sending the meal tonight." My heart hammered against my ribs. Was it over? Was I free? A wild, foolish hope flared within me. "My mother wishes to thank you personally," she continued, extinguishing the hope as quickly as it had appeared. "You'll be having dinner at our home tonight." My blood ran cold. The thought of entering their world, the heart of their power, was terrifying. My café was my territory, a place where I still had the illusion of control. Their home would be the lion's den. "I don't think that's wise," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes hardened. "It was not a request. Be ready in an hour." There was no room for argument. An hour later, I was sitting in the back of the Bentley, the leather seats feeling cold and foreign against my skin. I had changed out of my stained work clothes and into the nicest thing I owned, a simple dark suit. It felt woefully inadequate as we passed through a set of imposing iron gates and drove up a long, winding driveway. The house wasn't a house. It was a compound, a modernist masterpiece of glass and steel that loomed against the night sky. It was stunningly beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth, a monument to wealth and power. Seo-yeon met me at the entrance and led me through vast, echoing corridors that felt more like a museum than a home. The air was still and cool, and my footsteps were silent on the polished stone floors. The dining room was immense, dominated by a long table that could have seated 40. Tonight, only 3 places were set. The old woman, Mrs. Seo-yeon, sat at the head of the table. She looked even more frail than I remembered, dwarfed by the high-backed chair, but her eyes were just as sharp. She smiled warmly as I entered, a genuine grandmotherly expression. "Ah, the artist has arrived," she said, her voice raspy but kind. "My dear, please sit. Forgive an old woman's sentimentality, but I had to meet the man whose cooking has brought me more comfort than any medicine." Dinner was served by silent staff. It was an elaborate, multi-course meal, the kind of food I could never afford, but it all tasted like ash in my mouth. Mrs. Seo-yeon was a charming host, telling stories and asking me about my life, about the café. She spoke of kindness and integrity as the highest virtues, and I felt a dizzying sense of cognitive dissonance. How could this gentle, philosophical old woman be the source of the fear that now ruled my life? All the while, Seo-yeon sat in silence, her face a mask, watching the exchange between her mother and me. She was a spectator at her own mother's carefully orchestrated performance, and I was the unwitting lead actor. After dessert was cleared, a nurse appeared and gently helped Mrs. Seo-yeon to her feet. She was tired, the nurse explained softly. She paused beside my chair, placing a cool, dry hand on my shoulder. "You have a strong spirit, Kofi," she said, her sharp eyes holding mine. "It is a rare and valuable thing. Do not let this world break it." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the cavernous room with Seo-yeon. The silence she left behind was heavier than before, charged with everything that had been left unsaid. Seo-yeon stared into her untouched glass of wine, her jaw tight. "That was a performance," I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. "She wanted something from me." Seo-yeon finally looked up, her eyes dark with a complex mix of anger and resignation. "She always wants something," she said, her voice low and bitter. "You're right, it was a performance. For you, for the staff, for anyone who might be watching, everything is a message." She stood and walked to the vast window overlooking the glittering, indifferent city lights. "You asked why you. My mother believes in symbols. She is dying, and her world is preparing for the chaos that will follow. There are rivals, enemies, who think her condition has made her weak. She wanted to show them she is still in control, still capable of bringing a complete unknown, an innocent, into the very heart of her world. It's a demonstration of absolute power." The truth of it settled over me, cold and heavy. I wasn't a person to them. I was a symbol, a pawn in a game I never knew I was playing. "So the kindness, the pastry, it was all a lie." "No," she said, turning back to face me. "That was the one genuine part. It's what gave her the idea. She was truly touched by your kindness. But my mother is a master strategist. She takes a piece of truth and builds a fortress around it. She used your genuine goodness for her own purposes to create a story, a message of stability to her enemies and her allies." She took a step closer, and for the first time I felt like she was speaking to me, Kofi, not the symbol. "She did not consider the consequences for you, or perhaps she did not care. Now that you have been seen here, now that you are publicly associated with her, you are no longer an unknown. You are part of the story, and her enemies may decide to make you a target, to send a message back to her. To me. The full weight of my situation finally crashed down on me. I had thought my prison was the café, my sentence the 3 months of cooking. But my real prison was my new identity in their world, and my sentence was indefinite. I had been branded. The fear I felt before was a pale shadow of the terror that now gripped me. I was no longer just a captive. I was a target. The final weeks of the 3-month period were a descent into a new kind of hell. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension. The security personnel outside my cafe were no longer just a passive presence. They were alert, their eyes constantly scanning the street, their hands never far from the inside of their jackets. Seo-yeon's visits became more frequent, but they were shorter, more intense. The mask of cold indifference was gone, replaced by a raw, simmering anxiety she barely kept in check. She would pace the length of my empty cafe, her phone buzzing incessantly, her conversations clipped and brutal. She was a woman fighting a war on multiple fronts, and I was a vulnerable, undefended piece of her territory. I continued to cook, the routine the only thing keeping me sane. Each meal I sent off felt like a prayer for the old woman's peaceful end, because I knew her death would be the trigger for the chaos Seo-yeon had predicted. The end came on a rainy Wednesday night, almost 3 months to the day since the old woman had first walked into my cafe. I was boxing up a simple vegetable stew when the door burst open. It was Seo-yeon, but she was a version of herself I had never seen. Her hair was disheveled, her jacket was gone, and there was a dark, ugly bruise high on her cheekbone. Her eyes were wild with a fury that was terrifying to behold. "She's gone," she said, her voice a raw rasp. "My mother is dead." Before I could process the words, she grabbed my arm, her grip like iron. "We have to go, now." She pulled me toward the door, but we were too late. The sound of shattering glass exploded behind us as the front window of my cafe imploded. My sanctuary, my dream, was being destroyed. Men in dark clothes poured out of a van, wielding bats and crowbars, smashing everything in sight. It was a calculated, brutal message, an attack on me to provoke her. In that moment, seeing the ruins of my life, something inside me snapped. Fear gave way to white-hot rage, but Seo-yeon's reaction was even more potent. She shoved me behind her, shielding me with her body, and a sound came from her throat, a low, guttural snarl of pure, unrestrained fury. Her security team, the silent sentinels, materialized from the shadows, and the street descended into a swift, violent clash I couldn't bear to watch. She dragged me out the back door and into a waiting car, the sounds of the fight fatting behind us. She took me to a sterile, anonymous apartment high in a skyscraper, a place that was clearly a safe house. She paced the room like a caged predator while I sank onto the sofa, trembling. "This is my fault," she said, stopping in front of me, her voice choked with self-loathing. "I brought this into your life. I put you in danger." She looked at me, and all the power, all the control had been stripped away, leaving only a raw, desperate woman. "They will not stop. Now that my mother is gone, they will see you as my weakness, a way to get to me." She took a deep breath, her face a mask of grim resolve. "I can make you disappear. A new name, a new life. Anywhere in the world you want to go. You'll have enough money to never worry again. You can be free of this." She was offering me an escape, a way out of the nightmare she had created. I could go back to being anonymous, safe. I could have a normal life again. But as I looked at her, at the woman standing before me, bruised and bleeding for me, I realized the thought of leaving felt like its own kind of death. The choice was mine, to run and forget, or to stay and face the fire. I looked around the cold, impersonal room, a gilded cage far more luxurious than my cafe, but infinitely more confining. I thought of the life she was offering me. A life of running, of looking over my shoulder, a life bought with money that was likely stained with violence. Then I looked at Seo-yeon. I saw the guilt warring with fierce protectiveness in her eyes. In the ruins of my cafe, amidst the terror, she hadn't hesitated to shield me. She had stood between me and the world she had dragged me into. My old life was gone, shattered like the front window of my shop. Running would not bring it back. It would only mean letting the forces that destroyed it win. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm, resonating with a certainty that surprised even me. "I'm not running. This is my city. That was my cafe. You don't get to destroy my life and then pay me off to sweep the pieces under a rug somewhere else." Her head snapped up, her eyes widening in disbelief. Kofi, you don't understand. Staying here with me, it's a death sentence. My life as I knew it is already over, I countered, standing to face her, my fear finally giving way to a defiant strength I didn't know I possessed. The only choice I have left is how I live the one I have now. I won't live it as a coward. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. She searched my face, looking for any sign of hesitation, of fear. She found none. A slow, weary sigh escaped her lips, and some of the fight seemed to go out of her, replaced by a profound, heart-wrenching sadness. Your kindness, she whispered, more to herself than to me, is going to get you killed. It's the only thing I have left that's truly mine, I replied, and I won't let you or them take it from me. In the days that followed, the city held its breath. The news reported on a series of organized crime incidents, a sanitized term for the brutal, silent war Seo-yeon was waging against her rivals. She was rarely at the safe house, but when she returned, she was a ghost, bearing new bruises and a deeper exhaustion that seemed to settle into her very bones. She was consolidating her mother's empire, securing her position as the new head of the family, and she was doing it with a ruthless efficiency that both terrified and fascinated me. When the storm passed, she came to me. The war was over. She had won. She looked older, her face leaner, the last traces of the arrogant woman who had first walked into my café gone forever. She took me not to the ruins of my shop, but to the top floor of a new building overlooking the city, a space of clean lines and expansive windows. The café is gone, she said, her voice filled with quiet regret. I can't give that back to you. The life you had, it's gone, but I want to build a new one with you. It wasn't a proposal born of romantic fantasy. It was a declaration from a woman who had stared into the abyss and had chosen to climb out. She wasn't offering me a fairy tale. She was offering me a partnership in a dangerous, uncertain world. She was the cold, calculating head of a criminal empire, a queen in a kingdom of shadows. I was the cafe owner who had offered a moment of warmth to a lonely old woman. Our paths should never have crossed, yet they had become irrevocably intertwined. My simple act of kindness had not been repaid with money or simple gratitude. It had been repaid with the destruction of my world and the offer of a new one, a world of immense power and constant danger. At the side of a woman I had come to see not as a monster, but as a prisoner of her own legacy. And as I looked out at the city lights, I knew there was no going back. I took her hand. It wasn't an ending. It was a new, terrifying, and unpredictable beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another thrilling tale. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought, and share this video with anyone who loves stories of unexpected connections and dangerous choices. See you in the next one.